Hello, my name is Andrew Connor. Today I'm going to talk about the Permian Extinction, or as it's also called, the Great Dying. It was the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history. To give you some depth and understanding and just how great the scale was, here's some numbers. An incredible 95% of marine and 70% of terrestrial species were eliminated as a cause of it. That means that all the biodiversity on Earth today came from 5% of the remaining marine life and 30% of the remaining terrestrial life. The world at the time of the Permian period, which began precisely more so, 298.9 million years ago and ended 252.2 million years ago, was much different than our world today. Whereas today, the continents are spatially situated largely independently of each other. During the Permian period, all the tectonic plates were situated such that Earth's land masses were, mashed together into a supercontinent named Pangaea. You may have heard of that in some of your other classes, but yeah, it was basically just one major continent. And to go with this, there was also just one major ocean, and it was called Panthalassa, just surrounding Pangaea. So yeah, much different than what we have today. To give you a better idea of what the late Permian period looked like, it helps to take a look at the types of animals that roamed the land and traversed the seas, and as well as the plants that populated the earth at the time. The newly arrived amphibians primarily dominated the early Permian period, while the middle Permian period was ruled by primitive therapsids. Um, these are an order of animals that was positioned relatively vertically on 4 feet. And some of these animals, the ones that made it through the extinction, would go on to evolve into mammals. The late Permian period was also dominated by therapsids, but these evolved and advanced from their earlier forms. So they're basically just evolved forms of the previous kind, just more advanced, more suited to their environment. Here's a picture of what these animals look like. You can see how they kind of look like dinosaurs, but you can also see how they could be the groundwork for the mammals as if they got four limbs positioned beneath their bodies. But yeah, so right near the end of the Permian period, just before the mass extinction occurred, the first archosaurs appeared. And these creatures were basically just reptiles, and they looked like crocodiles in appearance. And they would eventually go on to evolve into the dinosaurs that became basically the apex predators during the Triassic period. I understand, like, while this may be all hard to imagine, given some of the obscure names like Triapsid or and such, the important thing to realize is that the Permian period gave rise to fully terrestrial animal life, as well as the first physically large carnivores and herbivores. Another thing interesting to note about this time period was that it was the first time period that insects were really able to thrive. And the ones that really thrived were primitive relatives of cockroaches, and they dictated roughly 90% of the insect population at the time. So there were just cockroaches everywhere. Think of it like that. And as time passed during the Permian period, the Earth became progressively drier. At the beginning of the Permian period, it was, there were swamps and a lot of plants that were dependent on wetlands. But as time passed, gymnosperms, which are like cone-bearing trees, came to the forefront, and they started to thrive as Earth dried out. So scientists estimate that 2/3 of the animals in the sea during the late Permian period were sessile organisms. What sessile means is that these animals were unable to move voluntarily. They're usually tied down to something or like stuck to some part of the ocean. Outside of sessile organisms, there are these organisms called trilobites, and they're a type of marine arthropods. They're kind of similar to, I guess you could say, today's like horseshoe crabs. Here's a picture of a trilobite on the bottom here. Pretty gnarly looking creatures. Where was I? But yeah, like I said, trilobites were a type of marine arthropods, and then there are also mollusks, echinoderms, and other things of the like. Um, so you might be able to get a grasp of this, but more so than not, Earth was really thriving during the Permian period. There are a lot of new life forms coming up and staking their claim, I guess you could say. Some of the scientists today even contend that the diversity of life then was much more abundant than the life that we have even here on Earth today, if you can imagine that. Obviously, though, the abundance of life that was around then didn't make it today, as we no longer have creatures such as the trilobite or uh, therapsids. Um, so we have to ask ourselves basically what happened to these animals, and how is it that such a large proportion of these species died off so quickly? How was it that certain animals were able to survive while others did not? Further, let's take a look at how scientists and geologists in particular were able to figure out answers to these questions and by what means. It was during the middle of the 19th century that paleontologists, which are scientists that study fossils in order to learn more about lives from earlier time periods, started to notice that there was a major shift in the types of fossils that they dated from before and after 252 million years ago. Um, what what Yeah, one such example would be the trilobite mentioned earlier. No evidence exists indicating that this animal was around once the Triassic period began 252 million years ago. However, there's evidence that from the Permian period that indicates the sea was filled with these creatures. And then once they found this, they also found evidence um, that suggested the same thing happened with other life forms. They found that Permian forest filled with tree ferns completely vanished around this time, and in their place, barren expanses of weed-like plants sprung up. Geologists found that the oceans during the Permian period were well populated with coral reefs, yet with the advent of the Triassic period, 252 million years ago, they seem to have collapsed. So, with an abundance of fossils discovered and two clearly distinct sets of biodiversity being evident from different geological periods, it became clear to scientists that they were looking at what had to been, a mass extinction of unseen proportions. So once scientists were able to come to the conclusion that a mass extinction had occurred approximately 252.8 million years ago, the next logical step to take was try and figure out what had caused this mass extinction. There are varying hypotheses on this matter, and they aren't necessarily mutually exclusive of each other. That is to say that it is possible that multiple factors contributed to the Permian mass extinction. So, in order to cover the largest sector of possibilities, um, we will discuss the more widely accepted theories and take a look at what evidence has been collected to support these theories. One interesting find that geologists came across studying rocks that formed around the time of the mass extinction is a high ratio of light carbon to heavy carbon found within the rocks from that time period. What this indicates is that the atmosphere at the time of the period of extinction was abnormally heavy with carbon dioxide compared to rocks that they had found from earlier in the Permian period. This being the case, the next question to be answered is what could have caused such a devastating increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in such a relatively short time. What many scientists believe is that the extinction is a result of a massive volcanic eruption that occurred in modern day Siberia. Geologists surveying Siberia indicate that the basaltic lava spewed 250 million years ago now covers about 2 million square kilometers. To put that into perspective, that is the size of Western Europe. All odds are that it covered more land, like way more land, even back then. Um, so, how exactly would a massive volcanic eruption be the demise of the biosphere? Let's break it down. When a massive volcano erupts for a prolonged period of time, in this case, it's estimated that it erupt for over a million years, which sounds just incredible. It's a relatively short time um, in a geologic time period, I guess you could say. So it would, if it's releasing stuff for about a million years, um, it would release a tremendous amount of sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and some other gases into the atmosphere that prevent sunlight from reaching Earth's surface. So, due to the lack of sunlight, plants and marine organisms, that are basically dependent on photosynthesis, would die out, thus triggering a complete collapse of the food chain. Any organisms not immediately impacted by the collapse of the food chain, so basically just the outliers that were able to manage on environments that didn't depend on plants and other animals, they would most likely be affected by a rise in atmospheric carbon dioxide proliferated by the decimation of plant life. So, what this is saying is that carbon dioxide increases because plant life isn't able to take it in and turn it into oxygen. So, because of this increase in carbon dioxide, an increase in the global temperature occurs, and animals and creatures would be affected by the climate change. So, that said, we can see how a massive volcanic eruption could possibly contribute to the Great Dying. But we really can't be certain that is the main cause, and because of this, we're going to take a look at some other possibilities that geologists have explored. Quite possibly, an impact event um, could have caused the Permian extinction. Some scientists believe an impact event is like when an asteroid um, flies into Earth's surface, generally causing a huge crater and a lot of fallout. One of the largest driving forces behind this notion is that it would explain why more organisms weren't able to quickly evolve and adapt to a changing global climate. With such a high percentage of species being eliminated, it seems logical that a force that caused immediate destructive changes triggered the mass extinction. One of the problems that geologists have supporting this theory, however, is that they cannot find a suitable impact site for an asteroid that would wreak such devastation. Also, if it were to have landed in the ocean, we wouldn't be able to find it because the ocean floor is never older than 200 million years old due to subduction. So the ocean floor is basically just like a conveyor belt constantly refreshing itself. One possibility worth mentioning as an impact site is the Araguaia crater in Brazil. Geologists have dated it to have formed about 254 million years ago, with give or take 2.5 million years, um, and it was due to an impact event with an asteroid. While that doesn't sound it isn't spectacularly large. Geologists think that the impact um, would have caused tremors in the Earth, which would have released an incredible amount of oil and gas into the atmosphere, triggering a significant spike in global temperatures, leading to the Permian mass extinction. So while geologists don't really know for certain what caused the Permian mass extinction, as time passes, they continue to uncover more and more pieces to the puzzle and get ever closer to the answer. So basically, right now, we're just left with mere hypotheses regarding what happened, but much of what has been put forth so far is in the realm of possibilities, and it's been confirmed as possible just by geological evidence found beneath, deep beneath Earth's surface. So thanks for listening. Appreciate you taking the time. That's all. Thank you.